Hello everyone, this is Nick here, recording my second content-oriented video, Who Am I? The Identity Paradox. Hope you all have had a good day up to this point. I'm recording this super late at night, so I'm just going to dive right in. What is a paradox? A paradox, per Google's word-for-word definition, is a statement or proposition that, despite sound reasoning from acceptable premises, leads to a conclusion that seems senseless, logically unacceptable, or self-contradictory. In simpler terms, a paradox is a concept that on the surface appears logical, but upon deeper analysis proves illogical, or vice versa. Think of George Orwell's doublespeak. A paradox gives way to a split in understanding. To best understand this abstract concept, I will briefly explain one of the most popular paradoxes, the liar's paradox. Before I start talking on the basics of the paradox, I think it's worth mentioning that personally, I feel it is easiest to understand by reading rather than listening. Thus, I have linked a helpful article in the description of this video so that you can reference it if you get lost. Make sure to carefully listen to this next section, as it is easy to get lost in the logic. This statement is false. Think for a moment about what I have just said. This statement is false. Well, if it's true that said statement is false, then that makes it a true statement. Contrarily, if it's false that it is true, then indeed the statement is not false, but true. Simply put, no matter how you look at it, the statement will always find a way to be false and true. Confused yet? The idea of a paradox is not to discover what is the correct way to analyze the problem, but instead is supposed to critique the way our minds work, opening a logical loophole of sorts. To better understand this idea, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the picture in the background. Now, at first glance, you probably noticed the frog sitting on some kind of grassy structure, waiting for a fly or some sort of stimuli to come by so that it can act. Now, here's something I want you to do. Turn your screen 90 degrees counterclockwise. What do you see? Well, odds are you've now noticed that the picture appears to be a horse's head peering out of a stable. An optical illusion, in other words. Logic, which is indeed the most defining adaptive characteristic of humans, allowing us to conceptualize, symbolize, and abstract in order to better acclimate ourselves to the world we live in, does have its flaws. And with this, I now feel confident in presenting to you the focus of my video, the identity paradox. Here is an idea I had earlier today. Us humans define ourselves by an identity. But it is an identity that hardly scratches the surface to our ultimate, incredibly complex being, a being in which our rather limited minds can hardly grasp or examine in a way to accurately assign an identity. In normal terms, however, your identity can simply be defined as the socially acceptable way to present yourself to someone, but also to understand yourself. Say you go out on a blind date. The conversation will likely start by introducing yourselves. You'll say your name, maybe give a compliment, and you begin to extract information by asking questions about your date. Things like, where did you grow up? What are your interests? Your profession? And the list goes on. Often, this exciting phase of questioning continues until you either find a similarity, some topic of interest is brought up, or one of you takes an extended trip to the restroom. But assuming things go as planned, the conversation will branch in a new direction, one that focuses less on the individuals and now more on an idea. Most of what has been asked up to this point of the date are characteristics of one's being, information that defines who you are, how you got into the life position you now find yourself, and so on and so on. It's quite simple, really, to explain these attributes when conversation is steered in such a narrow and predictable manner. What I mean is, when someone asks you, "What do you do for a living?" the answer is clear and easy to convey. Well, most of the time, given your primary source of income is one that is socially acceptable, meaning it is both legal and not of low status. But what if someone, whom you've only but just met, asked you a much broader question? Who are you? When posed such questions, the mind almost freezes. Unless clever by nature, most people would hesitate, unsure of how to respond, possibly even going as far to ask for clarification. Is it the unexpectedness of the question that catches us off guard? Maybe, though if we aren't able to answer such a fundamental question about our being, what significance is the answer to any question based in a higher degree of analysis? Maybe it is the simple fact that as human beings, we are all aware of these broad ideas. Clearly, another person knows that you are a person, and that you are a product of two other persons falling in love and producing an offspring. But this does not define who one is. This just defines how one came to be. And if we are so curious as to who one is, so as to ask specific questions of their being, such as what their favorite genre of music is, why is the idea of asking broadly who one is so odd and off-putting? And so is the identity paradox, which I think can be further thought of and explained in terms of the ideas covered in my last video. Who am I? The three selves. There exists in all of us the undiscovered self, hidden in the unconscious. I called it the inner self. And I believe that much of who we are and why we are dwells in this inaccessible abyss within the mind. A majority of what we identify with is conveniently locked in our consciousness and accessible through memory, though it is all somewhat of a gimmick to suggest you are but simply the product of your memory, as such a conclusion would assume you were nothing as an infant. But as we all know, an infant is much more than nothing. So why has it become standard to describe yourself in terms of this tiny fraction of the whole you? Well, it is due to the simple fact that the majority of our being, meaning the true reasoning and mechanics behind what we are and who we've become, are hidden from our consciousness in this great abyss. But why then, if it is inaccessible, should it matter at all? Well, my thinking is this. It is not that such aspects to the human mind are permanently locked off and inaccessible. No, I think instead it is the fault of a societal stigma, which is to define oneself simply by what the self does on a conscious level. For it seems to limit our analysis of the deeper meanings and implications to being human, so much that the average person, I would guess, likely spends no more than 24 hours in their given lifetime truly focusing and pondering who they are in the broadest sense. And for perspective, the average human lives about 79 years, which implies they exist for 692,000 in 40 hours. Okay, yes, a bold claim to say the least, one which may stray from the truth. Even still, the bottom line is that the human identity is minimized by all of us to a subset of activities one pursues, thoughtlessly and naively ignoring the fundamental basis and truest reasons behind why these activities are what we pursue. With that, I can reference a study, one in which I hope to cover in a future video, conducted by psychologists Thomas Bouchard and David Licken, called Sources of Human Psychological Differences, the Minnesota study of twins reared apart. This study, which I'll link below, has some crucial evidence to back up some ideas I've entertained in this video. But the paradox remains. Since we are so much more than meets the eye, why is our level of interest and status in society judged primarily by our surface level beings? And why is this deeper thinking neither encouraged, nor so much as introduced, in any standardized form of education? And with that, everyone, I am concluding my video on the identity paradox. Please comment below what you thought. I personally think this is pretty interesting and want to see what the community has to say. I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, take it easy.